Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing, Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood Coleman, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. This week in my political intelligence briefing, the featured country is Nicaragua. Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega, the leader of the ruling Sandinista National Liberal Front, has carried out a ruthless crackdown on individuals viewed as political rivals to himself and his wife, Vice President Rosario Murillo. As many as 5 likely presidential candidates for elections to be held in November of this year have been arrested under the aegis of a controversial treason law. That legislation enshrined the government with expansive and sweeping powers to classify citizens as traitors to the homeland, with the Nicaraguan courts being the judicial wing of the Sandinista government. They would likely ensure the arrests were validated with cynical complicity. In total, approximately 20 people have been detained. One of President Ortega's most prominent targets was presidential candidate Cristina Chamorro, who was in detention on dubious money laundering charges. Chamorro was the daughter of journalist Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, who was murdered in 1978 by the extrajudicial militia of Nicaragua's dictator Anastasio Somoza Debayle. Also under arrest have been several journalists. With this threat at hand, a renowned journalist, Carlos Fernando Chamorro, the editor of the Confidencial website, fled the country. Chamorro was the son of the aforementioned murdered journalist, Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, and sister to the aforementioned presidential candidate, Cristina Chamorro. Carlos Fernando Chamorro said that he left Nicaragua to safeguard his freedom. After a month of seclusion, President Ortega, who was first elected to power in 1984, emerged to deliver a speech. In that speech, he warned that those who had been arrested would be punished according to the law for carrying out alleged crimes against the state. He also declared, and I quote, "Nicaragua is the safest country in the region," a claim that his critics would undoubtedly challenge. The general consensus has been that both President Ortega and his wife, Vice President Murillo, are afraid of a repeat of 2018, when Nicaragua was rocked by mass protests, with protesters demanding the resignation of both Ortega and Murillo. Protesters rallied against the devolution of Nicaragua into a dictatorship fraught with corruption and nepotism. With elections to be held later in 2021, Ortega and Murillo appeared to be geared towards avoiding a similar pre-election landscape and ensuring a glide path to re-election victory and their absolute lock-on power. The fact that they would use such blatant mechanisms of repression to do so stands as an admission of their own political weakness in Nicaragua. The United Nations Human Rights Council has expressed deep concern over the recently enacted laws that unduly restricts political participation, freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association in Nicaragua. Human Rights Watch has also condemned the arrests and called on the United Nations to bring the Nicaraguan crisis before the Security Council. As to the clear violation of press freedom, Pedro Vaca, the rapporteur for freedom of expression at the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, condemned the Sandinista regime for its violations, saying the darkness in which the regime operates fares the light of independent journalism. Staying in the region of the Americas, the post-election landscape in Peru remains tumultuous. In the aftermath of the second round of the presidential election, right-wing candidate Keiko Fujimori has refused to concede the election to left-wing candidate Pedro Castillo. The election result was being reviewed by the National Jury of Elections, but the adjudication of the election was plunged into turmoil when a judge on the panel reviewing the disputed votes, Luce Arce, declined to continue his duties. Moreover, he made politically charged allegations that everything seemed to have been decided a long time ago in favor of the left-wing candidate, Castillo. The National Jury of Elections reacted to this news by saying that it was considering the next foot forward with an eye on safeguarding democracy and completing the electoral process. Also in this hemisphere was the situation in Colombia, where there was an attack on the aircraft carrying Colombian President Duque. The helicopter carrying President Duque, as well as Defense Minister Diego Molano, was hit by gunfire as it closed in on the Cucuta airport close to the border with Venezuela. The area where the attack ensued along the Colombian and Venezuelan border has been a notorious coca-growing region. The Catatumbo region was known to be a stomping grounds of the rebel National Liberation Army. While no one on board was injured, photos indicated bullet holes in the rotor and tail of the helicopter. It should be noted that this particular attack on the president's helicopter occurred weeks after car bombing at a military base in Cucuta that injured 36 people, including 2 United States military advisors. Across the world in the Middle East, the United States Pentagon launched airstrikes against Iran-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, a move likely to confound negotiations related to the reconstitution of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. According to the United States Pentagon, the strikes were intended to hit operational and weapons storage facilities, and had occurred in response to attacks on United States interests in those countries, with the specific aim to limit the risk of escalation. The reality was the election of ultra-conservative Ibrahim Raisi as the new Iranian president was already likely to impact the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action negotiations. The Iranian president-elect made clear that he was not interested in perfunctory nuclear negotiations and also would not be meeting with President Joe Biden of the United States. The move by the United States to strike Iran's backed militias in Iraq and Syria could potentially further imperil the revival of the JCPOA. In Sweden, the government of Prime Minister Stefan Lofven was toppled in a no-confidence vote. Prime Minister Stefan Lofven would hold the dubious distinction of becoming the country's first head of government to lose a no-confidence vote, forcing him to either resign or call a snap election. A week after losing the no-confidence vote, Prime Minister Lofven, a social democrat, resigned from office. Lofven opted resignation, saying that an election would not be in the best interest of Sweden given the COVID-19 pandemic. He also pointed to the fact that an election was already scheduled for 2022. With Lofven resigning, the Speaker of the Riksdag would have to select a prime ministerial candidate who could conceivably be supported by a majority of the Swedish Parliament. Finally, let's discuss the latest with the pandemic. The bad news, the world is grappling with the highly infectious Delta variant out of India. The good news, many vaccines are effective in at least helping prevent hospitalization of those contracting the dangerous variant. As to vaccines, in June 2021, the company Novavax announced that its COVID-19 vaccine was shown to be highly effective in clinical trials. In fact, over 90% effective against symptomatic disease. The success meant that a 4th vaccine was on track to becoming available in the United States. The 2-shot protein subunit Novavax vaccine, which can be stored in refrigerators, could be made available to lower income and middle income countries through COVAX, the International Vaccine Sharing Organization. To that end, Novavax has earmarked more than 1 billion doses of its vaccine for distribution through COVAX. As has been repeatedly said, vaccines are not vaccinations. In order to beat this pandemic, people need to be vaccinated. In the United States, the Biden administration modified its targets. Instead of meeting the benchmark of providing at least 1 COVID-19 vaccine dose to 70% of adults by July 4th, Independence Day, it will reach the threshold of providing at least 1 COVID-19 vaccine dose to 70% of adults over the age of 27 by July 4th. The problem comes from young people and those in red states being vaccine hesitant. All I'm going to say on this subject is we're all in this together. Please get vaccinated. In the next edition of my political intelligence briefing, I will be covering the situation in Tigray in Ethiopia, Beijing's anti-democracy moves against Hong Kong. I will also cover vaccine diplomacy and the efforts by the United States and China to provide vaccines to countries across the world. For more information about these and other stories, read my political intelligence briefing and my coronavirus report, both of which are accessible from the front page of the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day. And remember, as always, we live in an interconnected world.